Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means, Senate Committee on Finance, Joint Committees on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Senators Wynn, Titus, Taylor, Assembly Members Anderson, Brown May, Dickman, Hibbets, Mosca, Chair Watts.
I'm here. Thank you. We have all members present. We have a quorum. Couple just very quick housekeeping notes. We will have a public comment period at the end of today's meeting if you'd like to provide public comment. You can also provide public comment by phone. That number can be found on our agenda, which is also posted on the Nevada Legislature's website. Today, we will be closing 3 budgets in the Department of Transportation and many budgets in the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. One other thing that I want to make my Senate colleagues and members of the public aware of is that we will be taking a hopefully very brief recess at about 9:30. We have to take our class photo. Yeah, the most important work of the day. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started so we can get through as much work as we can before that recess. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Camacho-Pocal to lead us through DOT.
Thank you, Chair. Liliana Camacho-Pocal for the record. There are 3 budget accounts for the Nevada Department of Transportation, or NDOT, for the subcommittee's consideration for closing recommendations this morning, and all 3 were previously heard by the subcommittee. Starting on page 3, the Transportation Administration budget account 4660 was heard by the subcommittee on March 11th, and the Nevada Department of Transportation, or NDOT, is administered by a 7-member board of directors consisting of the governor, the lieutenant governor, the state controller, and 4 members appointed by the governor. There are 5 major issues in this budget account. The first is the highway fund balance and capital expenditures. The governor's recommended base budget includes highway construction expenditures totaling $578.6 million in fiscal year 26 and $578.7 million in fiscal year 2027. Page 4 includes the highway fund revenues as provided by the DMV in December of 2024. The table on page 5 includes the highway fund appropriations by the significant users of the highway fund when comparing the 2025 legislatively approved amount to the governor's recommended amounts. However, I would note that this table does not include the recent actions taken by the subcommittees for budgets recently closed. The governor also recommended over $137 million in highway fund one-shot appropriations, which includes $18.8 million in fiscal year 26 for the Core NV project and $10 million in capital improvement project funding, including $6.7 million in new general obligation bonds, bond proceeds supported by the highway fund. NDOT reported the unrestricted highway fund target balance, which is the minimum level necessary to sustain 1 month of operations and 1.5 months of capital construction, is $152.8 million in fiscal year 26 and $153.8 million in fiscal year 27. There were 3 work programs submitted to the April 3rd, 2025 IFC meeting for a total request of $50.7 million and are included at the bottom of page 5, and these 3 work programs were approved by the IFC. Including the IFC work programs, NDOT's projections show that by the end of the biennium, the unrestricted highway fund balance as $139.2 million, which is $14.6 million below the minimum level of $153.8 million in fiscal year 27. The department's highway fund projections do not include a non-IFC work program for $22.6 million in equipment purchases in fiscal year 2025, and the department indicates it did not include this amount because equipment receipt typically requires 1 to 2 years after the request, and the funds are not expected to be expended for a year or 2. Fiscal staff calculated the highway fund balance, including the non-IFC work program and NDOT's projections for fiscal year 2025, which would result in an ending highway fund balance of $28.9 million in fiscal year 2025, which is $122.6 million below the target balance for fiscal year 2025. NDOT indicates that the main factors in the projected remaining unrestricted balance for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27 falling below the minimum amount are that current highway fund revenue sources are relatively flat and have lagged behind inflation. NDOT indicates that non-essential state-funded programs like litter pickup, homeless abatement, and new building projects will see cuts or delays. Highway construction is funded with a combination of highway fund proceeds and federal revenue, which is projected to be $608 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium. And the table on page 6 provides actual federal revenue collected by NDOT in recent fiscal years, which averaged $407.5 million for the most recent 5-year period. Major projects NDOT plans to work on during the 25-27 biennium, funded with a mix of highway funds and federal revenue, are on page 7. And according to the department, and as discussed in the NDOT bond construction budget account closing document, the relatively flat highway fund revenue and a 66.5% increase in construction inflation have raised the cost for NDOT to maintain and develop state infrastructure. The growth in highway fund revenue, which is used to fund NDOT projects, has not kept pace with inflation, which has led to an increasing gap between highway projects' costs and available funding. To bridge the funding gap, the governor recommends issuing $323.2 million in highway revenue bonds over the biennium to help fund critical projects, which will be discussed in the next budget account. The DMV provided updated projections earlier this month, and the table's on page 9, which projected an increase of $24.8 million from fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2027. And based on this information, fiscal staff updated NDOT's projected remaining unrestricted highway fund balance, and the unrestricted highway fund balance would be $91.6 million in fiscal year 26 and $141.5 million in fiscal year 27, which indicates the highway fund balance would be about $12.3 million below the recommended amount of $153.8 million at the end of the 25-27 biennium. These calculations do not reflect actions by the subcommittee in closing the DMV and Department of Public Safety departments that differed from the recommendations in the governor's recommended budget. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 9. And does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for highway construction in the base budget totaling $578.6 million in fiscal year 26 and $578.7 million in fiscal year 27? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
We have a first from Chair Taylor, second from Vice Chair Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Liliana Camacho-Poco for the record. The second major issue is starting on page 9, and it's for 39 new positions. The governor recommends highway fund authorizations totaling $7.6 million over the 25-27 biennium for 38 new classified positions and 1 new unclassified rural community specialist position and associated operating and travel expenditures. The table on page 10 provides details of the recommended positions and the recommended start dates by functional area within NDOT. And NDOT indicated that they would like to reduce the request by 20 positions, which are highlighted in gray on the table, with 2 budget amendments. And on March 18th, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted Budget Amendment A2544660 and Budget Amendment A254884660 for the removal of 15 positions from Decision Unit E225 and 5 positions from Decision Unit E226, respectively, reducing the request to 19 positions, as indicated starting on page 7. NDOT indicated that the 13 positions included in Decision Unit E225 would perform the following duties. In District 1, there would be 1 new facility supervisor, 1 new maintenance repair specialist, and they would help the team address logistical challenges in balancing routine maintenance and complex multi-trade repairs at remote locations. In District 2, 1 new maintenance repair specialist would be responsible for building maintenance across the district. In District 3, 1 new maintenance repair specialist would be located in Elko Subdistrict, and 1 new maintenance repair specialist would be located in Ely Subdistrict. And these positions would ensure facilities in these locations would remain functional. There is 1 request for a new Auditor 3 position in the equipment team, and who would be responsible for more complex NDOT accident and credit card audits, and they would supervise the current audit position. And this position would also help address recent Legislative Council Bureau audit findings. And then another headquarters administration auditor would be responsible for department internal audits. And a headquarters administration IT technician would provide network support and network field support. A headquarters administration management analyst would coordinate with services providers to resolve IT issues. A personnel technician would plan and implement recruitment activities. A construction engineering technician would be based in the materials team, which conducts tests in asphalt, concrete, and soil to ensure compliance with specifications. Headquarters construction special equipment operator would be responsible for the construction, maintenance, and inspection of bridges. Headquarters construction transportation technician would assist the planning team, roadway data, and research, and assist with road data collection. And the Environmental Services Program in Decision Unit E226. On March 18th, 2025, the Governor's Finance Office submitted the Budget Amendment A25-488-4660 for the removal of 5 positions from this request, reducing the request to 1 new Environmental Scientist 3 position and 1 new Environmental Scientist 4 position. And these 2 positions would assist with the desert tortoise construction monitoring in southern Nevada to meet permit requirements. 2 new program officer positions in Decision Unit E228 would assist the department with developing, evaluating, and monitoring and mediating service agreement procurement department-wide. Decision Unit E229 is the continuation of 1 personnel officer position for the department's human resources operations in response to the transfer of the department's current equal employment opportunity officer position, who was transferred to the Division of Human Resources Management budget account for the division's Equal Employment Opportunity Centralization Initiative. And Decision Unit E19 includes the new unclassified rural community specialist who would facilitate direct communication with local governments to address transportation challenges in growing rural counties. And this position would assist to identify transportation priorities for potential projects eligible for federal funds, ensure transportation projects advance outside urban areas. Additionally, there are approximately 69 positions that have been vacant in the Nevada Department of Transportation's budget account that have been vacant for longer than 1 year as of March 8th, 2025. During the budget hearing on March 11th, the department indicated that the 2 new environmental scientist positions would support NDOT's environmental services program. And due to limited internal capacity, NDOT outsources portions of this work to consultants and contractors. The department also indicated the new and classified rural community specialist would improve early engagement and communication with rural areas and would assist to strengthen partnerships and enhance project planning. And NDOT stated it has reviewed the approximately 69 long-term vacant positions to determine whether they would be repurposed for new staffing needs. And while some positions may be reallocated, many, particularly in rural maintenance and engineering, are still critical and difficult to fill. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 14. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for 18 new classified positions and 1 new unclassified rural community specialist position and associated operating and travel expenditures as revised by Budget Amendment A25-474-4660 and Budget Amendment A25-488-4660 for total highway fund authorizations of $3.8 million over the 25-27 biennium, and decisions pertaining to unclassified position salaries will be determined by the money committees when the 2025 pay bill is considered. Fiscal staff requests authority to make any adjustments subsequently required and to enter other technical adjustments as necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions on this item? Senator Nguyen.
Can I just confirm? I know that there were quite a few vacancies in here. Was it like, do we have a number of how many open positions there were within this?
There were 69.
60? I believe it was 69. Is that
69.
Is that correct?
Yes, the 69. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Liliana Camacho Poco for the record. The 69 positions were vacant as of March 8th, and they had been vacant for longer than a year.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. At this time, I'd like to recommend an alternative motion. There's three parts to it, so stay with me. I recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for one new unclassified rural community specialist position and associated operating expenditures in Decision Unit E819 for total highway fund authorizations of $242,549 over the 25-27 biennium. And I also recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for one personnel officer position and associated operating expenses in Decision Unit E229 for total highway fund authorizations of $274,795 over the 25-27 biennium. And I'd like to recommend not approving the governor's recommendation for 17 new classified positions as recommended in Decision Units E225, E226, and E228 as revised by Budget Amendment A254744660 and Budget Amendment A254884660. Additionally, I recommend that we direct the agency to review its long-term vacant positions, as referred to by my colleague, to determine whether they could be repurposed or reclassified for new staffing needs, and also recommend providing fiscal staff with the authority to make any technical adjustments that may be deemed necessary by the money committees or that may be necessary.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. The third major issue discussed will be starting on page 14, and is for the rest facility improvements. And based on documentation in the executive budget, the governor recommends a highway fund authorization of $18.5 million in fiscal year 27 for design improvements and construction at 3 existing rest facilities at Trinity, Millers, and Bewawi. The agency indicates that the general conditions of these facilities are deficient as a result of aging infrastructure, accessibility issues, and increased needs for capacity to accommodate higher traveling public demand. And although documentation in the executive budget indicates that this recommendation would provide funding for improvements at 3 rest facilities, the department indicates that only the Bewawi rest facility would be reconstructed in the 25-27 biennium if this funding is approved. Based on updated projections provided by the agency, it now anticipates design and construction cost of approximately $47.7 million for the 3 facilities, and updates on the rest facility projects are identified on the top of page 15. And the Bewawi rest facility's east and westbound reconstruction design is complete and does not require additional design fees. And the governor's recommended highway fund authorizations of $18.5 million in fiscal year 27 is for the Bewawi rest facility construction costs. The agency projects the total project costs for the Millers Rest Facility, the Trinity Rest Facility, and Bewawi Rest Facility would be $20.3 million. During the budget hearing, the department indicated that the delay in completing design improvements and construction at their 3 rest facilities is primarily due to limited state funding being redirected to more immediate priority projects, and as a result, projects at Trinity and Millers have been deferred without a confirmed start date at this time. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 15. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of highway fund authorizations of $18.5 million in fiscal year 27 for Bewawi Rest Facility improvements?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I recommend that we approve this recommendation as stated by staff.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Liliana Camacho Polka for the record. The next decision unit starts on page 15, and it is for the fueling system upgrade, and the governor recommends highway fund authorizations of $7.9 million in fiscal year 26 and $6.7 million in fiscal year 27 to continue upgrades of the department's fueling system, which began in fiscal year 26. When originally approved by the 78th Legislature in 2015, the department projected the cost for the fueling system would be approximately $16.3 million and would be completed over a 4-year period. However, the agency now estimates the fueling system upgrade would be completed in calendar year 2030. And the table on page 16 provides the statewide fueling system upgraded costs by fiscal year as approved by the legislature from 2016. And the fueling system upgrade consists of replacing underground fuel tanks with above-ground tanks incorporating modern fire safety enhancements to prevent fuel leakage and fires, and updating current key-based systems with more secure card-based systems. And NDOT indicates that there are 53 fueling sites throughout the state, which are used by 92 state and local governmental agencies. The agency indicates that upgrades have been completed at 31 fueling sites, with 22 additional sites planned to be upgraded. And the governor's recommendation for highway fund authorizations would allow the addition of a 54th site at the NDOT District 1 South Yard located in Las Vegas. During the budget hearing, the department indicated that the fueling system upgrade project exceeded its original cost projections, primarily due to unforeseen issues, including numerous existing leaking underground tanks that required environmental remediation. And the initial scope focused on pump replacement, but the project expanded significantly to include modernizing card access systems and replacing old tanks with more durable above-ground models and to prevent future issues. Following the budget hearing, the department provided updated projections indicating an extended project completion timeline in fiscal year 2031 with total estimated cost of $64.7 million. The department indicated that most of the complex high-effort sites have already been addressed and remaining sites should be less resource-intensive. And the decision for the subcommittee is on page 17. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of highway fund authorizations of $7.9 million in fiscal year 26 and $6.7 million in fiscal year 27 for fueling system upgrades?
Thank you. Members, any questions? All right, seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I recommend that we approve this as read by staff.
We've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Liliana Camacho Poco for the record. The fifth major issue is on page 17, and it's the information system enhancements. And the governor recommends highway fund authorizations of $11.7 million in fiscal year 26 and $9.9 million in fiscal year 27 for information technology system enhancements to continue the application, maintenance, and enhancements to the existing NDOT information technology systems. And NDOT maintains several applications that allow the department to operate the state transportation system, and many are at end of life or are no longer supported by the vendor. The planned system enhancements include the migration of existing applications and systems to cloud-based systems, and they would also replace some older legacy systems as detailed in the table on page 18. During the budget hearing, the department indicated that the need for IT system enhancements is due to significant numbers of legacy systems reaching end of life and end of support, which compromises cybersecurity and compliance with state policies. And replacing these systems is necessary for maintaining operational integrity and security. And due to limited staff and resources, NDOT phase replacements over multiple biennia, prioritizing the most urgent needs to manage costs and ensure execution. Future enhancements are being implemented in phases, each delivering standalone value to allow for future expansion without full dependency on prior phases. And the decision for the subcommittee is on page 18. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of highway fund authorizations of $11.7 million in fiscal year 26 and $9.9 million in fiscal year 27 for IT system enhancements?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we accept the recommendation as read by staff.
We've got a first from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. There are 10 other closing items, 4 of which include the noted technical adjustments on pages 19 through 20. I would note other closing item 8, base budget positions. The governor's recommended base budget includes an increase of 3 FTE from those approved by the 82nd Legislature. And on March 18, 2025, the governor's finance office submitted budget amendment A256184660 for the elimination of 2 positions from the base budget. Additionally, on April 25th, the department identified an additional vacant position for elimination. And to correct these issues, fiscal staff recommends approval of the budget amendment to eliminate 2 positions and a technical adjustment to eliminate 1 additional position from the base budget and reduce personnel expenses by $130,418 and a corresponding decrease of highway fund authorizations over the 25-27 biennium. And fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 5 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 6 be closed consistent with the action by the Joint Subcommittee on General Government related to the transfer of equal employment opportunity positions. Other closing items 7, 9, and 10 be closed with the noted technical adjustments. Other closing item 8 be closed with the noted technical adjustment and approval of Budget Amendment A25-618-4660 with authority for staff to remove 3 FTE from the base budget and request authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we accept the recommendations as read by staff.
Got a first from Chair Taylor, second from Assembly Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. The next budget account is Bond Construction Budget Account 4663, starting on page 21. And this budget account was heard by the subcommittee on March 11th, and pursuant to NRS 408.273, the State Board of Finance shall, when requested by the Board of Directors of NDOT, issue special obligation bonds to provide money to enable NDOT to complete pending and currently projected highway construction projects. There is one major closing issue in this budget account, and it's bond funding for construction projects. And the governor recommends the sale of $85 million in bonds pledged with state highway fund revenue, the sale of $75 million in bonds pledged with fuel revenue indexing generated for the state highway fund in Clark County, and interest earnings of $1.6 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium, which would be used for construction costs of the Henderson Interchange Project in Clark County and the US 395 North Valleys Project in Washoe County. NDOT indicates these funds would accelerate project timelines and address rising construction costs driven by inflation. The Henderson Interchange Project, initially estimated at $350 million, was restructured into a phased design bid build approach due to budget overrun bids and under the original design build procurement. NDOT has completed the necessary environmental and right-of-way purchases and is coordinating with the City of Henderson to identify project phasing with initial construction projected for 2028. The US 395 North Valleys project is further along with Phase 1B already under construction and completion expected by spring of 2026. Total project costs for Phase 1B and Phase 2 are estimated at $435 million, funded through a combination of bonds, federal aid, and highway fund authorizations. The department indicated that the estimated cost for the US 395 North Valleys project is $95.4 million in bond funds, which would leave a balance of $227.8 million in bond authority for the 25-27 biennium, based on the governor's recommended bonding amount. The department has several planned or deferred projects that could potentially utilize the remaining funds depending on priorities and needs during the biennium. The decision to issue subordinate bonds pledged for repayment by Clark County's fuel revenue indexing funds rather than senior bonds was made to increase financial flexibility and align with a NDOT 2015 policy shift recommended by the State Treasurer's Office. Subordinate bonds require only 2 times coverage versus 3 times coverage for senior bonds. NDOT's latest bond issuance followed the consultant's advice to issue fuel revenue indexing bonds with a 2 times coverage ratio, as this would result in a more favorable bond terms while maintaining stronger coverage for the senior motor vehicle tax revenue bonds. Despite the lower coverage requirement, the difference in interest costs between subordinate and senior bonds is minimal. For example, when NDOT recently issued both subordinate and senior bonds, the difference in interest rates was minimal, approximately 0.01% difference in fiscal year 24 and 0.04% difference in fiscal year 25. The use of both bond types, along with backup coverage for motor vehicle fuel taxes, maintains strong overall coverage, and the department indicates that this approach offers favorable terms and supports more efficient use of restricted revenues without significantly increasing borrowing costs. During the hearing, NDOT emphasized that bonding allows the department to advance large-scale projects earlier, saving long-term costs by avoiding delays amid rising construction inflation, which the department indicates has increased by over 66% from 2020 to 2023. And during the hearing, the department also indicated it does not have plans to currently pledge governmental services tax revenue for bonds at this time, but governmental services tax revenue is relied upon to provide funding for pay-as-you-go projects. NDOT indicated it continues to prioritize federal funding first and seeks to maintain flexibility in bond issuance decisions. The recommended bonding approach is viewed as favorable given current market conditions, with final decisions on bond sales subject to approval by the Transportation Board and the State Board of Finance. And the decision for the subcommittee is on page 27. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the sale of $85 million in bonds pledged with state highway fund revenue, the sale of $75 million in bonds pledged with fuel revenue indexing generated for the state highway fund in Clark County, and interest earnings of $1.6 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium for construction projects?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we approve the recommendations as read by staff.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, second from Vice Chair Assembly Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. There are no other closing items in this budget account. And the next budget account is the Wildlife Crossings account, budget account 4659 on page 29. And this account was heard by the subcommittee on March 11th. And NRS 408.656 establishes the Wildlife Crossings account in the State General Fund as a continuing budget account without reversion. And there is only one major closing issue in this budget account, and it's the status of Wildlife Crossings projects. And the governor's recommended budget does not include new revenue or expenditures and instead balances forward existing funding of $5 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium. NDOT received a $5 million general fund appropriation in fiscal year 2024 through AB 112 of the 82nd legislative session to support wildlife crossing projects, including design, construction, and planning. However, due to project delays, during the current interim, none of the funds have been spent, and the governor recommends balancing forward the full amount in each year of the 25-27 biennium. NDOT indicated it was able to absorb costs internally for a variety of uses, including research, a statewide infrastructure inventory, prioritization of wildlife conflict areas, creation of a connectivity plan, grant writing, and related activities. NDOT further indicated it has saved the appropriated funding to provide the state match portion for federal grants. This approach is intended to maximize opportunities to leverage federal dollars, and the department was notified in December of 2024 of a $16.8 million federal grant award for the Coyote Springs Tortoise Crossings project, which requires a $1 million state match. The project will address the last unprotected Mojave Desert tortoise corridor in Nevada with 61 wildlife crossings and 68 miles of fencing along U.S. Route 93. During their budget hearing, NDOT stated they estimate about $2 million in expenditures over the 25-27 biennium, $1 million for the state match, and $1 million for grant writing and planning. However, these costs are not included in the executive budget. The department also noted that federal funding for future wildlife projects remains uncertain, and given rising construction costs, inflation, and infrastructure needs, NDOT emphasizes the importance of leveraging state funds to maximize federal grant funds. And a recent statewide assessment identified 90 critical road segments for wildlife crossings and identified the top 30 with 5 complete or requiring minor modifications, and the estimated cost to address the remaining 25 high-priority locations exceeds $719 million. Given the department estimates providing $1 million for the state matching requirement for the Coyote Springs Tortoise Crossing project over the 25-27 biennium, the subcommittee may wish to consider placing funds that have not been identified for the state match requirement into a reserve category, which would generally require interim finance committee approval before it could be utilized, and leaving $1 million in the expenditure category in fiscal year 26. The decision for the subcommittee is on page 32. Does Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of A, placing the $5 million into reserve GL within an expenditure category, which would allow the department to balance forward funds between fiscal years over the 25-27 biennium and expend those funds without interim finance committee approval as recommended by the governor? Or B, placing $5 million into a reserve category, which would generally require interim finance committee approval before it could be utilized and would allow the funds to balance forward each year over the 25-27 biennium? Or C, providing $1 million in expenditure authority in fiscal year '26 and placing $4 million in the reserve category, which would generally require interim finance committee approval before it could be utilized and would allow the funds to balance forward each year over the 25-27 biennium. Fiscal staff requests authority to enter technical adjustments as necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I recommend that the subcommittee not approve A, not approve B, but to approve C as read by staff, including the authority to make technical adjustments.
Okay, we have a first from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? One thing that I'll just note on this, I think we're all very supportive of this program and know that this is kind of the first session that it's been built into the budget. And I think the sense among us is that when we convene to create our budget, any plans for the biennium to utilize those funds, we'd like to see those incorporated and brought before us so that we can consider providing the expenditure authority for that. And then for any additional expenses that come up during the course of the interim, just bring those before IFC and we'd be glad to consider those. So that's how we'd like to try and address some of that moving forward. Senator Titus?
Thank you for that, Chair. And just a clarification, if we do this, just see, are we losing any of the federal funds that we have been awarded?
Thank you for that. So the $1 million in expenditure authority is what's been identified as the need for the state match for that federal grant. And then any additional expenses that NDOW has beyond that, if it's for staffing or other things related to that project, we would just ask them to come before IFC with an item to utilize additional funds from this. Just make sure that we have some ongoing transparency and legislative oversight over the expenditure of funds in this budget.
Perfect. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. There are no other closing items, and that is all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll be in a very brief recess while we switch staff. Okay, we will now begin with the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Mr. Luna, take it away.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Good morning. Justin Luna for the record. We'll begin on page 33. State Parks Budget Account 4162, heard by the subcommittee on March 25th. There are four major closing issues. The first major closing issue, the governor recommends general fund appropriations to add 9 new commission law enforcement positions to provide sufficient coverage for parks with high visitation rates. The recommendation includes 1 new Commission Park Supervisor position and 4 new Commission Park Ranger positions in fiscal year 2026, and another 4 new Commission Park Ranger positions in fiscal year 2027. According to the agency, the recommendation to add additional Commission law enforcement positions across multiple parks statewide would balance workload, improve response times and customer service, and enhance public safety. The recommendation to add additional new commission positions in fiscal year 2027 effectively staggers hiring and onboarding, largely due to the timing of the interview process and the available slots for the required Peace Officer Training Academy held semi-annually. During the budget hearing, the agency explained new commission law enforcement positions would help fill staffing coverage gaps that exist in parks throughout the state, especially at all hours facilities and parks with high visitation rates. The agency described the range of incidents handled by commission law enforcement staff at the parks as similar to those experienced by any other local law enforcement agency, often in remote locations with limited or delayed capacity for response or backup. I'll note on page 35, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to correct the salary grades to reflect the 2-grade salary increase approved by the 82nd Legislature in 2023 for the division's commission law enforcement positions. The decision for the subcommittee on page 35. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $1.3 million over the 2025-27 biennium to add 1 new Commission Park Supervisor position and 4 new Commission Park Ranger positions in fiscal year 2026, and 4 additional Commission Park Ranger positions in fiscal year 2027, inclusive of the technical adjustment recommended by fiscal staff to correct the salary grades of the recommended new positions?
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Members, any questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to this is going to be another alternative motion, just because we know we're in those times and we can't hire and give everybody all the positions that we like. Doesn't mean we don't like the positions, but we're just tight. But so my recommendation is that we do the following. I recommend approval of general fund appropriations to add 1 new Commission Park Supervisor position and 2 new Commission Park Ranger positions in fiscal year 26, and 2 additional Commission Park Ranger positions in fiscal year 27, and also to give staff the authority to make technical adjustments as necessary.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna again for the record. Major closing issue number 2 at the bottom of page 35. The governor recommends general fund appropriations to add 1 new administrative services officer position and associated operating costs to manage fiscal and administrative personnel. During the budget hearing, the agency explained the need for higher-level accounting and management staff as the division has grown in size and complexity. The decision for the subcommittee on page 36. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $244,154 over the 2025-27 biennium to add 1 new administrative services officer position and associated operating costs?
Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. Major closing issue number 3 on page 36. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $154,212 in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium for dashboard cameras and body-worn cameras for use by the division's law enforcement staff. Currently, the division's commission law enforcement positions are not required to wear body cameras or have dashboard cameras in vehicles, and the agency does not utilize any dashboard or body-worn cameras at this time. As a result of the officer-involved shooting with a park ranger position at the Valley of Fire Park in July 2024, the division would like to provide body-worn and dashboard cameras for park ranger positions, both as a public safety measure as well as a tool for transparency in similar type of situations. The cost for the cameras is an annual expense providing an all-inclusive service that supplies the camera hardware as well as data storage management of the captured video. During the budget hearing, the agency indicated the cameras would provide video documentation of public safety incidents, especially when the division's commissioned law enforcement officers may be alone on the scene of an incident for long periods of time in remote locations before any backup can arrive to assist. The agency clarified that the division's policies and procedures would clearly outline when the devices should be used as it relates to traditional law enforcement duties. The decision for the subcommittee at the top of page 38. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $308,424 over the 2025-27 biennium to lease dashboard cameras and body-worn cameras for use by the division's law enforcement staff?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we accept the approval, that we accept the recommendations as read by staff.
We've got a first from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. Major closing issue number 4. Governor recommends a reduction in Federal American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds, including the elimination of vendor contract services and one existing management analyst position that currently supports the division's reservation system due to the projected expenditure of the majority of the federal funds allocated to this project by the end of fiscal year 2025. The governor also recommends corresponding general fund appropriations to continue vendor services contracts for the reservation system and to continue the existing management analyst position. With the temporary federal ARPA funds no longer available as an ongoing funding source for this project and position, the division indicates it requires a permanent funding source for the annual costs of the system moving forward, plus staffing to monitor the contract and manage the project in order to continue to offer the reservation services. Reservation system also operates as the accounting software for fee collection, gift shop point of sale transactions, and park permit inventory system. During the budget hearing, the agency discussed the importance of continuing to fund the ongoing costs of the vendor services contract that is currently in place for the reservation system once the federal ARPA allocation is spent. The executive budget recommends general fund appropriations to continue vendor services for the reservation system contract and to continue one existing management analyst position serving as the reservation system manager and contract monitor. However, during the budget hearing, the agency indicated that the reservation system fees generated and retained by the state would only be sufficient to fund either the contract or the supporting position, but not both during the upcoming biennium. The amount of fees revenues collected may increase with the implementation of day use reservations at Sand Harbor State Park for a full season, but the projections are uncertain. After the budget hearing, the Governor's Finance Office transmitted Budget Amendment A257624-162 on April 1st, 2025, which recommends changing the funding for the one existing management analyst position from general fund appropriations to reservation system fee revenue and aligns the reservation system fees special use expense category with the projected reservation system fee revenue anticipated to be paid to the reservation system vendor per the contract agreement. Given the uncertainty of the projected reservation fees, the subcommittee may wish to recommend continue funding for vendor services for the reservation system contract and one existing management analyst position serving as the reservation system manager and contract monitor as one-time funding for the 2025-27 biennium, and recommend the agency include the requests as enhancements for future consideration by the 84th Legislature in 2027 when more reliable information would be available on the reservation system fee revenue. Additionally, if the subcommittee wishes to approve continued funding for vendor services for the reservation system contract and one existing management analyst position, as recommended by the governor, it may wish to recommend issuing a letter of intent requiring the agency to report to the IFC. The agency could provide an update on the status of the reservation system. As a note, the governor's recommended budget does not include ARPA funds authority for this project over the 2025-27 biennium. However, any remaining ARPA authority that is unexpended at the end of state fiscal year 2025 would be available to be balanced forward to provide services in fiscal year 2026 and may serve to offset any general fund appropriations potentially approved for the project. The decision for the subcommittee on page 41. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a reduction in federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds totaling $558,617 over the 2025-27 biennium in Decision Unit E499, including the elimination of vendor contract services for the reservation system and one management analyst position that currently supports the division's reservation system effective July 1st, 2025? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $175,000 in each fiscal year of the 2025-27 biennium in Decision Unit E598 to continue vendor contract services for the reservation system? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reservation system fee revenue totaling $208,617 over the 2025-27 biennium in Decision Unit E599 to fund one existing management analyst position recommended to be eliminated in Decision Unit E499, inclusive of budget amendment A257624162 to change the funding source for the management analyst position from general fund appropriations to reservation system fee revenue and align associated revenue and expenditure authority for the reservation system? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend the funding associated with the continuation of the reservation system and the associated management analyst position be requested through an enhancement decision unit in the 2027-29 biennium? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend the money committees issue a letter of intent to the Division of State Parks requesting the agency submit a report to the IFC by July 1st, 2026 that includes a status update on the reservation system?
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Members, any questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that, that we approve all of the decisions that were just read by staff, but additionally, I'd like to add in that we would like a letter of intent to do on the analysis of the planned ongoing self-sufficiency. I know we've been in that process, and the self-sufficiency of the reservation system fee structure, and any other recommendation that fiscal staff determines relevant regarding the operations of the reservation system.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? One thing I just want to say really quickly is we really appreciate your efforts. We see the work that was done here to help move us towards where we want to be. I understand that there's uncertainty about our ability to get there, and so I think we're definitely willing to meet halfway, but we really want to follow up on this next session and figure out how we get this all the way to self-sufficiency. So thank you. All right, seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. On page 42, there are 13 other closing items. I'll note on other closing item 3, the subcommittee during the review of the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs on April 26 did not recommend approval for eliminating the transfer, so that transfer will continue. On other closing item 11 is contingent upon passage and approval of Assembly Bill 543, along with a technical adjustment from fiscal staff. Other closing item 12 includes budget amendment to reconcile credit card discount fee expenses. And other closing item 13 includes recommendation for Authorizations Act language similar to that which was included in 2023. And I'll note in the decision box on page 43, the word in that first sentence, all, should be stricken. So I'll not include that. So that should be removed. But fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1, 2, and 4 through 9 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 3 not be approved, consistent with the Money Committee's closing action in the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs Administration budget account. Other closing item 10 be approved, consistent with the subcommittee's recommended approval of the companion decision units in the DCNR administration budget account, 4150. Other closing item 11 be closed contingent upon the passage and approval of enabling legislation, along with the noted technical adjustment. Other closing item 12 be closed reflective of budget amendment A257624162 as noted to adjust funding for credit card discount fee expenses. Other closing item 13 be closed providing fiscal staff with authority to include the noted language in the 2025 Authorizations Act, and fiscal staff recommends authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, I move that we approve the recommendations as read by staff.
Second.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. That's all on state parks, so we'll move to page 47 to begin the review of water resources. Budget account 4171, also heard by the subcommittee on March 25th. There are two major closing issues. The first major closing issue, the governor recommends a reduction in Federal American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funding, including the elimination of one existing management analyst position and one existing administrative assistant position that currently support the project to digitize the division's records. Effective December 31st, 2026, due to the expiration of federal funds. The governor also recommends a general fund appropriation in fiscal year 2027 to continue the two full-time positions recommended to be eliminated using state funding beginning January 1st, 2027, with no change in purpose. The agency also received $6.4 million in federal ARPA funds for contracts implemented by the Desert Research Institute, DRI, and the United States Geological Survey, USGS, to continue work on projects over the 2025-27 biennium to focus on data analysis and finalizing reports to update water availability and estimates throughout the state. The governor's recommendation does not include any funding for contract services for this project in the 2025-27 biennium, and the agency indicates that any remaining authority available for project contracts at the end of fiscal year 2025 would be balanced forward during the fiscal year closing process. Additionally, the executive budget does not recommend any alternative funding to continue this project after the expiration of federal ARPA funds on December 31st, 2026. During the budget hearing, the agency provided an update on the progress of the ARPA-funded projects to modernize and digitize state water records and to update water availability estimates throughout the state, including a confirmation that the division anticipates to fully expend the ARPA funds for both projects by the federal deadline of December 31st, 2026. The agency emphasized the need to keep the two full-time state positions currently funded with ARPA funds beyond December 31st, 2026 to continue the record digitization efforts maintain future records management and going forward, and provide customer service to the public for navigating the online digital archives. In a follow-up request, the agency specified plans to spend the full ARPA allocation by the federal deadline and clarified the need to continue the work beyond the 2025-27 biennium. The agency also provided a detailed plan and timeline for the project's anticipated scope with priorities for the types of files that are planned to be digitized over the 2025-27 biennium. In order to align projected costs anticipated for the 2025-27 biennium with budgetary authority already built into the adjusted base budget, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to revise the ARPA revenue and associated expense authority in the base budget to reflect $2.4 million over the 2025-27 biennium for the project to update water availability estimates throughout the state, and $458,420 over the 2025-27 biennium to continue the digital records project, including authority needed to fund the continuation of the two positions and associated costs through December 31st, 2026, along with authority to continue contract services for the digital records project, along with technical adjustment to increase the general fund appropriation in fiscal year 2027 by $14,626 to support the appropriated operating expenses related to the positions that were inadvertently excluded. The decision for the subcommittee on page 50. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a reduction in Federal American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds totaling $4.3 million over the 2025-27 biennium in Decision Unit E499, including the elimination of one management analyst position and one administrative assistant position that currently support the project to digitize the division's records, effective December 31st, 2026, due to the expiration of the federal funds? If so, does the subcommittee also wish to provide authority for fiscal staff to make technical adjustments to reflect ARPA Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds Revenue Authority of $2.4 million over the 2025-27 biennium for the project to update water availability estimates throughout the state, and $458,420 over the 2025-27 biennium to fund two positions and continue contract services for the digitization of the division's records through December 31st, 2026. And does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of a general fund appropriation of $96,269 in fiscal year 2027 in Decision Unit E599 to continue the two full-time positions and operating costs recommended to be eliminated in Decision Unit E499, with authority for fiscal staff to make a technical adjustment to add a general fund appropriation of $14,626 in fiscal year 2027 to support the appropriating operating expenses related to the positions that were inadvertently excluded.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval as read by fiscal staff, but with the direction for the general fund appropriations associated with the continuation of the two full-time positions and associated operating costs to be considered one-time funding and requested through an enhancement decision unit for the 27-29 biennium.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? I'll just say this is something that we're supportive of. We know it's a long-term effort. We just want to make sure that we have that coming back to the legislature next session so that we can get an update on where things are at and what the timeline looks like. So, seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. Major closing issue number 2 on page 50. The governor recommends general fund appropriations to reclassify one vacant classified supervisor professional engineer position to an unclassified administrative law judge position. The agency indicates that the vacant position would better serve the changing priorities of the division's hearing section as an unclassified administrative law judge due to increasing legal complexities in administrative hearings and determinations for water rights throughout the state. During the budget hearing, the agency discussed the critical need for the agency is a position that is able to conduct additional hearings and make legal recommendations to the state engineer to improve decision-making timelines and conclusions based on the best available science in adherence with Nevada's water law. The agency confirmed that the recommended reclassification would require a candidate for the position to be licensed as an attorney in the state of Nevada and explained that a professional engineer qualification is not needed based on the current workload. In a follow-up request, the agency provided specific statistics on the water rights decisions that are subject to judicial review and appeal, and explained how the division's hearings process worked. The decision for the subcommittee at the top of page 52. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of general fund appropriations of $113,235 over the 2025-27 biennium to reclassify a vacant classified supervisor professional engineer position to an unclassified administrative law judge position? Decisions pertaining to unclassified salaries and position changes will be determined by the money committees when the 2025 pay bill is considered. Fiscal staff requests authority to make any adjustments subsequently required.
Thank you, members. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval of the recommendations as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. On page 52, there are 6 other closing items. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 5 be closed as recommended by the governor, with other closing item 5 contingent upon approval of the final decisions for the position determined by the money committees with authority for fiscal staff to make any adjustments subsequently required. Other closing item 6 be approved consistent with the subcommittee's recommended approval of the companion decision units in the DCNR administration budget account 4150 and request authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval as read by staff, in addition to giving staff the authority to make the technical adjustments as necessary.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Justin Luna for the record. On page 55, State Lands Budget Account 4173, also heard by the subcommittee on March 25th. There are no major closing issues. There are 8 other closing items. I'll note on page 56, other closing item 7, requested technical adjustment. Other closing item 8 is a request for Appropriations Act language that was requested after the budget hearing due to a delay in the implementation of the division's land management system. The Governor's Finance Office supports this request, and fiscal staff requests authority to include this language in the 2025 Appropriations Act. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 5 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 6 be approved consistent with the subcommittee's recommended approval of the companion decision units in the DCNR administration budget account 4150. Other closing item 7 be closed with a noted technical adjustment. Other closing item 8 be closed with authority to include the requested language in the 2025 Appropriations Act and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations as read by staff.
We have a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right. I believe that concludes Mr. Luna, and you can take your time getting set up, Mr. Nichols. We are going to take a recess to go out and hopefully get our picture taken quickly. So we will be back as soon as possible. We're in recess. All right. Oh, we lost the quorum. Never mind. We're still in recess. All right. Now, the joint committees will come back to order. And I believe we will now start with forestry. Mr. Nichols, take us away.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Colby Nichols. I'm a program analyst with LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. It's my pleasure this morning to help the subcommittee with the portions of today's agenda relating to the divisions of forestry and environmental protection under DCNR. We'll begin with the forestry budget account, which is on page 57 of your closing packet. There are three major closing issues associated with this account. The first of which relates to protected plant permitting fees, and that begins on page 57 as well. The Governor is recommending authority of $100,000 in each year of the forthcoming biennium for the agency to collect permitting fees for the taking of a protected plant species as authorized in NAC 527.250. This is a permitting fee. It's established in regulation, is $150 per acre of land on a proposed project. However, in reviewing this enhancement, it was determined that as it exists in statute currently, the agency doesn't have the ability to retain this plant permitting fee to support the projects it's intended to support. Therefore, following the budget hearing, the agency has provided some draft language to LCB Fiscal that would amend Chapter 527 of NRS to include a stipulation that all fees collected pursuant to NRS 527.270 shall be retained by this budget account and used for the purposes established in that chapter of statute. So if the subcommittee wishes to recommend approval of this enhancement, it should also recommend one of the money committees request a bill draft to amend statute to allow the agency to retain the fee revenue. And excuse me, at that time, fiscal staff would provide that draft language to LCB Legal to be incorporated to a committee bill draft request. The decision for the subcommittee, as summarized at the top of page 59, is does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation for protected plant permitting fee revenues of $100,000 in each year of the 25-27 biennium to fund various projects associated with the preservation of threatened and endangered plant species? If so, the subcommittee should also recommend the introduction of a bill draft request sponsored by one of the money committees to amend statute to allow the agency to retain and use the fee revenue for authorized purposes.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval as read by staff.
We've got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown-May. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols, for the record. Moving on to the second major closing issue, which begins on page 59 of your packet. This relates to employee rental revenues for agency housing. Governor is recommending revenue authority of approximately $43,000 in each year of the forthcoming biennium to allow the agency to charge rent to employees who reside in agency-owned housing. This relates to three locations where the agency intends to offer employee housing to essentially as a perk to increase the agency's ability to recruit and retain staff. The intended monthly rent as basically the revenue authority that's included in this decision unit is based on an anticipated monthly rent of $450. Nevada Revised Statutes 322.063 authorizes the administrator of the Division of State Lands to lease residential property. However, this only applies if the conditions of a person's employment requires them to reside in such property. Similar to the previous major issue as discussed, in discussing this with the GFO and the agency, it was identified that the agency didn't necessarily have the statutory authority to keep the rental revenues. In addition, the statute as it's currently written has a stipulation that in order to be offered residential housing, the employee must be required to reside there. And again, the agency has provided some draft language following the budget hearing that would amend the statutes to allow the agency to retain rental revenues and allow them to offer those residences to staff, not only if they are required to reside in the location, but again, as an incentive to improve recruitment and retention efforts. Similar as before, if the subcommittee wishes to approve this enhancement, it should also recommend one of the money committee's request a bill draft. At that point, LCB Fiscal would provide the language to LCB Legal. The decision for the subcommittee, as summarized in page 60, is does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to establish employee rental revenue authority of $43,200 per year of the 25-27 biennium to allow the agency to charge personnel rent for agency-owned housing in Washoe Valley, Las Vegas, and Spring Creek? Again, if so, the subcommittee should also recommend the introduction of a bill draft request sponsored by one of the money committees to amend statute to allow the agency to retain and use the rental revenue for authorized purposes.
Thank you, members. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval of the recommendation as read by staff, and additionally, part of that motion is to recommend the introduction of the bill draft request sponsored, and so on as read by staff.
All right, we've got a motion and so on by Chair Taylor, second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? First of all, appreciate that the rent is affordable. And I'm thinking about moving out to Spring Creek. No other discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols, for the record. Moving on to the third major issue for this budget account, which begins towards the bottom of page 60. As the subcommittee may recall, in reviewing the fire suppression account, which we'll be discussing shortly, LCB Fiscal was directed to establish a working group with the agency and the Governor's Finance Office. This recommendation relates to 3 new positions for the incident billing unit. This is not a decision unit that was included in the executive budget. However, it is being submitted for the subcommittee's consideration to address some of the issues identified in the fire suppression audit, which again we'll be discussing shortly. So the agency has requested 3 new positions for the incident billing unit. They're intended to be funded with the transfer of reimbursement revenues from the fire suppression budget account in the amount of approximately $471,000 in fiscal year 26 and $463,000 in fiscal year 27. These additional 3 positions are intended to increase the staffing in the incident billing unit to identify the findings that were identified in the LCB audit report for the fire suppression budget account and improve their ability to implement improved billing practices. Again, this is related to the work of the working group. The 3 new positions include 1 administrative services officer position, 1 management analyst position, and 1 accounting assistant position. Those estimated costs provided previously, those are based on a position starting date of July 1st. The Governor's Finance Office concurs with this recommendation. The recommendation also includes $100,000 per year to fund contract costs associated with making changes to the agency's fire billing system to reflect some of what we'll be discussing in the fire suppression budget account shortly. The positions and associated costs would be fully funded by the transfer of incident reimbursement revenues from the fire suppression budget account. However, if the subcommittee wishes to recommend the establishment of a new out-of-state fire suppression budget account, which we'll be discussing as a major issue shortly, fiscal staff would recommend allocating the transfers across both budget accounts based on the percentage of incident billing unit costs funded through in-state and out-of-state reimbursement revenues. Fiscal staff also recommends the subcommittee consider recommending the issuance of a letter of intent to document that the new positions in particular and the incident billing unit's costs in general are to be allocated based upon in-state and out-of-state reimbursement revenues. And just one final note, as we move to the fire suppression budget account, there will also be a recommendation for a letter of intent there. If the subcommittee wishes to approve both, we would incorporate those into a single letter of intent for the division. The decision for the subcommittee, as summarized on page 61, is does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of 3 new positions for the incident billing unit, including 1 administrative services officer, 1 management analyst, and 1 administrative assistant, resulting in additional costs of $471,499 in fiscal year 26, $462,955 in fiscal year 27, funded with the transfers of fire incident response reimbursement revenues? And if so, does the subcommittee wish to recommend the issuance of a letter of intent to establish that these new positions in particular, and the incident billing unit's costs in general, be allocated based on in-state and out-of-state reimbursement revenues?
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Members, any questions? I know this is a little bit of a sneak preview of the major issues we're about to discuss. All right, seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval as of the recommendations as read by staff, and additionally, the recommendation to issue a letter of intent as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair. Colby Nichols for the record. Moving on to the other closing items, this begins on page 62 of your closing packet. There are 13 in total, 11 of which are summarized in the table there. I would just note on other closing item number 12, this relates to DCNR's efforts to centralize IT-related staff. So approval of this decision unit would be contingent upon approval of the companion decision units, and the subcommittee did recommend approval of those companion decision units when reviewing the DCNR administration budget account, and accordingly, we would recommend approval of this decision unit. Fiscal staff would recommend that other closing items 1 through 11 and 13 be closed as recommended by the governor, and that other closing item 12 be approved consistent with the subcommittee's approval of the companion decision units in the DCNR administration budget account. Requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments to this budget as needed.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move, what am I trying to say? Approval, that's it. I move approval of the recommendations as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols for the record. Moving on to the next budget account, this is fire suppression, and discussion of that begins on page 65 of the closing packet. There are 3 major closing issues associated with this account, the first of which has been prepared for informational purposes only. This relates to the implementation of the legislative audit recommendations. However, as we move to major closings issues 2 and 3, we will be addressing some of those issues that are identified in major closing issue 1. Major closing issue 1 is a summary of the audit report, as well as following the budget hearing, the agency did submit their required 60-day plan for corrective action. There's an update. You'll see a bulleted list on page 68. This is summarizing some of the details provided by the agency in that 60-day plan for corrective action. The first point, the agency had invoiced approximately $40 million in fire reimbursement bills, of which approximately $20.2 million was comprised of out-of-state incidences. Of that, the agency had received approximately $4.5 million in reimbursements from those total incidents billed. The second point, the agency had 276 bills invoiced that were awaiting reimbursement, which accounts for approximately $18.8 million in reimbursements owed to the state. And finally, bullet point 3, the agency had 541 incidents awaiting invoicing, which accounts for approximately $21.1 million in reimbursements owed to the state. Again, as we move through these other major issues, we'll be discussing courses of action that are intended to address some of these recommendations in the audit report, as well as details provided in the agency's 60-day response. Again, there's no decision for the subcommittee at this point, so Chair, if you're okay, I'd move on to major issue number 2.
Please go ahead.
All right. Moving on to major issue number 2, this begins towards the middle of page 69 of your packet. This relates to the fire response reimbursement revenue projections as recommended by the governor. The base budget includes reimbursement revenue authority of $4.7 million in each year of the biennium. The subcommittee may recall a methodology to project the fire suppression costs and reimbursement revenues was approved by the 2019 legislature. That methodology is based on a 5-year average of costs incurred, excluding costs supported with one-time funding. However, in reviewing the budget build as recommended by the governor, it was unclear to audit whether the methodology that was used tracked with the methodology previously approved. Therefore, some of those audit findings related to a lack of supporting documentation for the calculations. So during the budget hearing, the subcommittee asked how the agency anticipated funding emergency and fire incident response costs in the forthcoming biennium in the event that they exceed the $18.6 million included in the governor's recommended budget. And in response, the agency testified that since the $18.6 million represented anticipated authority, not necessarily cash on hand, it was likely that the agency would continue to make requests for one-time funding, including allocations from the IFC contingency account or supplemental general fund appropriations. While there was an enhancement to fully fund the 5-year average expenses in the agency's requested budget, this enhancement was ultimately not included in the governor's recommended budget. Subcommittee also asked how the agency intended to comply with the LCB audit report recommendations relating to how the agency documents and calculates that 5-year average. In response, the agency testified that historical issues complying with the previously approved methodology were due to decisions made to exclude anomalously large fire incidences from the calculation of the average. They provided some examples and had also testified that in some cases they had excluded entire years with really high fire costs from the average. The subcommittee directed the division and the GFO to work with LCB Fiscal to determine what adjustments, if any, were needed to align the revenue and expenditure authority in this budget account with the methodology that was previously approved by the 2019 legislature. However, the agency was unable to provide averages that excluded costs funded with one-time funding. Therefore, LCB Fiscal staff is recommending a series of adjustments. These are summarized in the pair of tables that the subcommittee will find on page 71 of their closing packet. The first of which relates to revenues, the second of which relates to expenses. I would just briefly note this is not an all-inclusive list of all revenues or all expenditures in this budget account, just the ones that are subject to this 5-year average methodology. The table is walking through the amounts included we'll start with the revenues, the amounts included in the governor's recommended budget, and then the 5-year average is calculated by staff using a period of fiscal year 19 to 2023. This represents the most recent 5-year average that the agency would have had the ability to use in building the budget. The difference is logged in those two columns on the farthest right. As the subcommittee can see, looking at the total line, to align the revenues to the 5-year average, we're looking at a net reduction in budgeted reimbursement revenues totaling $46,893 in fiscal year 26 and $79,780 in fiscal year 27. This reduction in reimbursement revenues would be offset with a corresponding need for additional general fund appropriations. Moving on to expenditures, the budget account includes 3 categories you'll see summarized in the table at the bottom of page 71. Those are a 5-year average of the costs in these categories as adjusted to remove costs funded with one-time funding allocations and appropriations. While the agency did provide the 5-year average for these categories, it did not include the adjustments to remove one-time funding. LCB Fiscal staff has calculated that adjusted 5-year average that's summarized in the table below. I would just briefly note, you'll see personnel is one of those categories. Just want to say there are no FTE in this budget account. The personnel category is used to fund overtime for firefighters, therefore the use of an average here is appropriate. Very similar to the revenues table, the amounts that are included in the budget as recommended by the governor, then the 5-year average, and ultimately the difference, resulting in an overall difference of $784,812 in fiscal year 26, $784,812 in fiscal year 27. In this case, the reductions to expenditure would have to be offset with would result in a reduction in general fund appropriations. So the net impact of those two tables together is a reduction in total budgeted expenditure authority. The net impact of the adjustments, is a general fund decrease of $737,919 in fiscal year 26 and $705,032 in fiscal year 27. However, approval of these adjustments may contribute to the agency's need to request one-time funding allocations in the forthcoming biennium. The decisions for the subcommittee, as summarized in the box on page 72, is: does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the noted technical adjustments to reimbursement revenues, resulting in a net decrease in $46,893 in fiscal year 26, $79,780 in fiscal year 27, with corresponding increases to general fund appropriations in each respective fiscal year to align the reimbursement revenue authority with the 5-year average methodology as approved by the 2019 legislature? And does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the technical adjustments to various expenditure categories, resulting in a net authority decrease of $784,812 in each fiscal year of the forthcoming biennium, with corresponding decreases to general fund appropriations in each fiscal year to align the expenditure category authority with the 5-year average methodology as approved by the 80th 2019 legislature? Or Does the subcommittee wish to not approve the proposed adjustments, effectively holding this budget harmless by not reducing the base budget by that 1.4 million over the biennium, and instead approve the budget as recommended by the governor, while also directing the agency to utilize the approved 5-year average formula in future biennia, or to submit an alternative funding proposal as an enhancement decision unit in a future biennium?
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval of the first statement as read by staff and the second statement as read by staff, and I move that we do not approve the third one.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Actually, I will hold my discussion until we kind of get through to the end of this. So, seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols, for the record. Moving on to the third major closing issue, which begins towards the bottom of page 72 of your packet. This is a recommendation for the creation of a new out-of-state fire reimbursement budget account. This is, again, something that is not reflected in the executive budget. However, to address recommendations that were included in the LCB audit report related to transparency of in-state and out-of-state fire incident response costs and reimbursements, LCB fiscal staff, in concurrence with the Governor's Finance Office, is recommending the establishment of a new out-of-state fire reimbursement budget account. To address the issues identified in the LCB audit report, additionally, To address the issues identified in the LCB audit report, the subcommittee may wish to consider the creation of this new out-of-state fire reimbursement budget account. Additionally, the subcommittee may wish to consider making appropriations to either or both budget accounts to serve as starting cash and to reduce the frequency of incidences where the agency needs to request allocations of funding during the interim. And finally, the subcommittee may wish to consider the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to update the IFC on the status of these budget accounts and the agency's efforts to comply with the LCB audit recommendations. Again, this is the product of the working group between the agency, the Governor's Finance Office, and LCB Fiscal following the budget hearing. The audit report included a recommendation to separately track out-of-state fire costs in the state accounting system and asked the agency to consider placing those reimbursable out-of-state costs in a separate budget account. In addition, another recommendation recommended the agency develop a separate funding formula for out-of-state fire suppression costs. To address these recommendations, we are recommending that a new budget account be established. During the budget hearing, the subcommittee asked the agency to identify any issues or challenges that could arise if costs or revenues associated with these out-of-state incidences were isolated into a separate budget account. In response, the agency testified that the existing budget structure allowed the agency to commingle reimbursements from in-state and out-of-state incidences. And they further testified that if funding and expenditure authority for the out-of-state incidences were placed into a separate budget account, it could potentially lead to challenges as one budget account or the other may end up with a shortfall. If the agency had to request additional funding, if one or both budgets had expenses that exceeded the revenues available. In addition, the agency indicated the creation of a separate budget account would contribute to increased workload related to the creation and processing of work programs, budget buildings, end-of-year activities related to the budget closing process. However, as we've discussed in the forestry budget account previously, there was a recommendation for additional staff for the incident billing unit. This should help the agency in addressing that increased workload that's associated with the establishment of a new budget account. To address the audit recommendations, fiscal staff is providing the following recommendations for the subcommittee's consideration. This is a numbered list that begins at the bottom of page 73 of your packet. Number 1 is the establishment of a new out-of-state fire incident budget account. Subcommittee could recommend a new budget account be established to account for all out-of-state fire incident reimbursement revenues and costs and create this new budget in statute. LCB fiscal staff would recommend that this new out-of-state fire incident budget account be allowed to balance forward funding, including any general fund appropriations as well as any reimbursement revenues, into the following fiscal year and future biennia, meaning funding in this account would not revert. Consistent with this retaining of the various funding sources, the new budget account could also receive treasurer's interest revenue on its available funding. By establishing this new budget account as non-reverting, the agency would be able to retain reimbursement revenue from earlier incidences to fund expenditures for subsequent incidences. Further, the GFO, legislators, and fiscal staff would be able to easily determine if there are issues with the agency's efforts to collect reimbursement revenue if the funding in this new budget account decreases over time. To establish this new out-of-state fire incident budget account in statute, the subcommittee would need to recommend a bill draft request be introduced by one of the money committees. To provide the starting funding authority for the out-of-state fire incident budget account, the subcommittee could recommend out-of-state reimbursement revenues of $32 million in both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. This amount represents the reimbursable expenditures that were not billed between 2020 and 2024 as identified in the LCB audit report. The subcommittee could direct the agency and the Governor's Finance Office to assist LCB Fiscal in establishing the appropriate cost for the new budget account for out-of-state fire incidences for the forthcoming biennium. As mentioned previously, costs for the incident billing unit should be allocated across this budget account, fire suppression, and the new budget account in a reasonable manner based on the percentage of staff time spent on billings for in-state and out-of-state incidences. Point 2 is a one-time non-reverting general fund appropriation to provide the agency sufficient revenues to begin paying for out-of-state response costs immediately once the forthcoming biennium begins. The subcommittee could also consider recommending a one-time non-reverting general fund appropriation to serve as startup funding for the new budget account. This general fund appropriation could be made to the new out-of-state fire incident budget account and could be provided through the bill draft request discussed previously. Further, to ensure the new out-of-state fire incident budget account has additional mechanism for cash flow, the subcommittee could also recommend that the legislation allow the budget account to receive a general fund advance if approved by the GFO director, which must be repaid before the fiscal year receiving the advance is closed. To avoid issues identified in the LCB audit report, the agency should not have the authority to transfer funding between the fire suppression account and this proposed new budget account. This would establish separate, transparent accounting mechanisms for both in-state and out-of-state fire incidences. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend general fund appropriations for the new out-of-state budget account, the general fund appropriation would be provided through the bill draft request that would be recommended by the Money Committee. However, the subcommittee could consider a recommendation for a one-time general fund appropriation in the amount of $10 million in the bill draft request, which would appear to provide some initial cash flow for this new proposed budget account. Point 3 relates to reporting to the Interim Finance Committee. In addition, the subcommittee may also consider recommending the issuance of a letter of intent requiring the agency to submit semi-annual reports to the IFC detailing the current amounts owed to and from the state for fire incident responses organized by whether they were in-state or out-of-state incidences, as well as by fiscal year. In addition, the report should provide an update on the agency's efforts to comply with the audit report recommendations. As I mentioned previously, if the subcommittee recommended the approval of the letter of intent mentioned in the forestry account, which it did, fiscal staff would incorporate that language into a single letter of intent. If the subcommittee chooses to recommend these previously noted items, the existing fire suppression budget account would effectively become the in-state fire incident budget account. The subcommittee should direct the agency and the GFO to revise the 5-year average formula currently used for the fire suppression budget account to remove fully reimbursable out-of-state transactions and to formally document the process for calculating the averages for both the fire suppression account and this proposed new budget account. This course of action would address several audit report recommendations relating to improving the agency's budgeting for fire suppression expenditures. To reduce the frequency for which the existing fire suppression budget account may have to request additional one-time funding during the 25-26 interim for in-state incidences, the subcommittee could also consider recommending additional general fund appropriations to this budget account, which would provide revenues to pay claims. Although it is difficult to estimate the amount of additional funding that should be provided to this budget account in fiscal year 25, the subcommittee could consider general fund appropriations of $5 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium to this fire suppression budget account. If authority is provided consistent with prior biennia, this budget account would have the ability to transfer general fund appropriations between fiscal years and provide some flexibility on the use of that funding. We'll be discussing that proposed back language as other closing item 1. These general fund appropriations to the fire suppression budget account would revert at the end of the 25-27 biennium, and the 84th Legislature in 2027 could consider revisions for future funding based on the various changes that may be implemented by the current legislature. The decision for the subcommittee is to implement all the proposals noted above. The subcommittee would need to recommend all of the following. A, direct the governor's finance and the agency to work with LCB Fiscal to 1, develop a new out-of-state fire incident budget account to separately account for out-of-state fire incident costs and revenues. 2, establish a new 5-year formula to project out-of-state revenue and expenditure authority. And 3, revise the existing 5-year average formula used for the fire suppression budget account to remove those out-of-state incident costs and revenues. And B, recommend that one of the money committees request a bill draft to establish the new, non-reverting, interest-earning, out-of-state fire incident budget account in statute, allow it to receive general fund advances based upon approval by the GFO director, and to provide the budget account with a one-time general fund appropriation in the amount of $10 million to provide startup funding. And C, recommend additional general fund appropriations of $5 million in each year of the 25-27 biennium for the existing fire suppression budget account to provide additional funding for in-state incidences to reduce the need for additional funding from the IFC contingency account or supplemental general fund appropriations. And D, recommend approval of a letter of intent establishing a semi-annual reporting requirement to the IFC regarding the amounts owed to and from the state for fire incidents responses, as well as updates on the agency's efforts to comply with the LCB audit report. In addition, fiscal staff would request authority to enter any necessary technical adjustments based on the recommendations of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Pretty simple. Committee members, any questions? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I need some clarification, having sat on this committee now for 6 sessions and truly have always been concerned that every interim we have them coming in front of us to ask for money for payments and then to discover that they were in such arrears with their billing. I know that there were changes needed to make some adjustments. But I'm not sure I see this as perhaps the solution that we were looking for, although I know that we were trying to do something. I'm concerned that how do you delineate strictly the in-state and out-of-state fires and creating those two accounts. One, our fires frequently either start at the California borders or our Oregon borders and they come into Nevada, or they start here and move over. So I'm not sure how that can be easily delineated. That'd be my first question. The second question is the accounting for this, where we know that they were having difficulties with billing and it was all about the computers and all of this stuff. Do they have the infrastructure, the personnel, and the capabilities of creating these two different accounts, and what will that look like?
Thank you for the questions. This is Colby Nichols for the record. I'll take my best stab at both of those, starting with the first relating to cross-jurisdictional fires. This will represent a challenge. In discussing this with the GFO and the agency, it's unclear. My understanding is the current process is whichever jurisdiction is the initial responder, they essentially have to pay all the bills, and then the allocation of the costs across all these different bodies, that's adjudicated later. So we would have to identify a way with which, so let's say a fire starts out of state and then crosses into Nevada land. I guess the question is, should those initial costs, which would be the responsibility of the Division of Forestry, should those be paid out of, in that case, the fire having started on Nevada land? I would imagine that those costs would be paid out of the current fire suppression account, which is recommended to become the in-state fire suppression account. And then essentially truing up, if it ends up having to be allocated between a combination of in-state or out-of-state, essentially truing it up after the fact, either during budget closing or perhaps through a work program revision. And the second question was relating to the staffing and the IT infrastructure and the fire billing system. Understanding that the creation of this new budget account would place some additional workload upon the incident billing unit. This was the primary driver of that recommendation that we were discussing in the forestry budget account, those 3 additional staff. And discussing this with the agency multiple times over a session, it sounds like the new fire billing information system, which is currently in use, has allowed them a great the ability to move a great deal quicker than they have. If you look at that 60-day response, I believe the agency has made a good faith effort and good progress on clearing the backlog of essentially unsent bills. Whether this, with the addition of these staff, whether that would be sufficient to meet the needs for billings moving forward, I believe it's at least a good start. I think the reality is we are unlikely to nail every single externality and what if with this, so I would say it's very likely that we will be revisiting this topic next session. In addition, in standing up this new budget account, there might be efforts taken during the forthcoming interim via work programs to more closely align expenditure revenue authority with where they need to be.
And just a quick follow-up, if I might, to staff.
One thing I just, before you follow up, I think Mr. Nichols did a good job. I just want to add a couple of things. So on the infrastructure side, as Mr. Nichols stated, we've kind of gotten the technical side fixed with the new billing system. And then just a couple of items ago, we approved some additional positions as well to help with this workload. And this was all worked on between LCB fiscal staff, GFO, as well as the agency. So there's been some conversations about making sure that we do have the resources, including the staffing, to handle this proposed change. And then I think while there are and will always be some challenges with figuring out and managing the details of these, I think the agency has indicated that they track fires that kind of fit into these different categories. And the main thing that we're trying to do is make sure that both how we see those as the legislature, as well as how do we handle the methodologies for trying to project those different expenses is handled in a transparent way. Please go ahead, Senator Titus.
Thank you for all of that. Just a quick question. How does the federal government look at, say, the BLM land? If a fire starts, does it delineate what state it starts in or whether it was a BLM land managed area?
All right, we're gonna have to call up.
This is regarding billing, because a lot of this will start on BLM land. I'm just curious if they look at it differently.
Thank you for the question, and committee, Casey for the record. Could you restate the question if it starts on?
Yeah, if we're going to start billing now state fires, out-of-state fires, from our state perspective, how does the federal government look at it when it comes to a BLM fire that starts on, say, BLM land or national forest land? Is it delineated what state it starts in or what region it starts in?
Yes, all of that. Thank you for the question. For the record, Casey. So all fires are delineated by where it starts. So that becomes the agency of billing. So if it starts on BLM in California land, it'll be a BLM coding number. Those are all in the system currently right now. That's how you can pull out in-state, out-of-state. The complication comes when it crosses state lines. We have to allocate it a state number within our state because those fires do not cross state jurisdiction. So the BLM California is not going to pay for Nevada's fire. FEMA grants don't cross state lines. So if we get an FMAG on our side, we have to differentiate the costs. And so that was, to Colby's earlier question, how it's going to complicate things for us. It's a whole different process for those in and out of state fires when they cross that state line, which we have almost every year. Long Valley, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Tamarack. There's a lot of them that happen. So we'll have to figure that out, and we will be asking what to do with those costs. And as you well know, some of those costs come in multiple different fiscal years. So we will have to figure out how to. We'll be JVing, I guess, costs into a different budget account and reimbursements into a different budget account over multiple fiscal years when we separate these two things. And if I might just add a little clarification to the workload issue, we had asked for the 2 positions back in 2020 because we saw the increase in workload coming because of the change in the federal agreement, the federal government used to pay for all of the costs for all of our fires across the state, and politely would take on all state costs out of state. Then they got audited and they were no longer able to do that. And so we rightfully had to take back the costs that were ours. That's why you saw a significant increase. So there is also an increase in workload with the new Advantage system. And I just want to put that on the record. When the budget accounts in the new system are not normally running in the negative all the time, but mine is. And so every time there is an update to the system, it kicks us out. It's not used to having a negative, so we got kicked out from billing and paying, and we are not paying today. That's because we don't have money. They figured out a system fix. This system fix takes one person about 18 additional steps per line item in Advantage 4 to approve through. It's 6 if you just get it through the first time. If it kicks all the way back to the beginning, it's 6 per step to get it through. So the workload is bigger for us because of a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is we have more fire. We have more fire that we now are financially responsible for because the feds used to carry our bill for us. And then my other fear with in and out of state, we just reduced the general fund overall, both of these accounts in one, and then maybe potentially looking to increase it. The 5-year average, I just want to give some numbers. In 2021 to 2024, as far as fire occurrence in the state, we were at, in 4 years, 286,000 acres. That's half of our actual annual average of fire each year over the last 20 years. Our big years were 17, 18, 2.4 million acres, 11 and 12, 1.3 million acres, 06, 07, 3.8 million acres, 01, 00, I don't know how you even say those, at 2.9 million acres. The highest in recorded history in the state of Nevada is 1.8 million acres. My fear is, and I had said this earlier, and I will do whatever I am told to do, but if we put all of our eggs in an out-of-state basket, and we are set up this year for a significant in-state fire season, we've already had 5 fires, and it's wet out there and raining. In-state, we had lightning hit in Reno, and it lit a fire in spite of all the rain we've seen. So we are scheduled and worried about this year's fire season in addition to the issues with our federal partners. So that's my only worry as well.
Thank you for that. Yes, I appreciate much of that. I do have one clarifying issue, and then I will speak to some of the other things that you brought up, but I appreciate you providing that additional context. And I see Governor's Finance Office in the back. Make sure the Core NV team is on that. Let's get those steps streamlined, please, ASAP. So just to clarify, kind of the responsibility for the fire is based on essentially the land ownership or jurisdiction where it starts, not who responds to it first. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, and again, for the record, Casey, it starts that way. We all have to pay our bills, so if I send responders, which we do, and the Federal Forest Service sends theirs, BLM sends theirs, local government sends theirs, everybody is initially responsible for their costs, and then it comes into a cost share, and it's decided in 4 different ways per the agreement. Most often, it's percent of effort or black acres, so it then comes down to how many acres of BLM land did we burn, and then how many acres of state land did we burn, how much did we each expend, and who owes who money at the end.
Thank you. Members, any additional questions? Senator Nguyen? Yes? No?
Question. I'll wait till the discussion.
Okay.
Could I add one clarifier just to the Advantage system? In fairness, they did fix it. This was the only fix that they could come up with. That was what we actually had to call them to start. We had a little minor, like $10,000 in authority left to pay bills. So we were hoping to get some bills paid. We called them because the override stopped working, and this is the permanent fix for Advantage 4 for accounts that are running in the negative. I don't think there's a different way to solve that problem because the system isn't recognizing negatives every time.
Thank you for that. That is helpful but very concerning since we are bringing on a brand new system and it is putting additional workload on agencies when the entire goal of the system was to reduce workload on agencies. So I'm just going to leave that out there. Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I move that we approve the recommendation as read by staff, and also include this additional recommendation that the new out-of-state fire incident budget account be provided with general fund appropriations of $100 in each year of the 25 to 27 biennium, which would provide the budget account with access to an allocation from the IFC contingency account. However, also establish budget policies that such an allocation should not be requested should only be requested as a last resort for funding, and that these appropriations should not be included in the agency's base budget request for the 27-29 biennium.
Okay, we have a motion from Chair Taylor. We have a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Discussion. Senator Titus.
Thank you for that, and thanks to staff and the department for being here. I'm not going to support this motion. I think it's a very convoluted system, and we're going to make it even more convoluted. And I think there needs to be some changes, but I'm not so sure this is the direction it needs to go. Also, with the new system that they have now implemented, the increase in collections, I think we need to give that time to settle out before we do this massive overhaul. Although I too am frustrated with every time at IFC, every year we come back and they ask for more requests, and I encourage rethinking of how this process is done, but I'm not convinced this is the direction we need to go. So I will be a no on this.
Okay, any other discussion? So before we get to the vote, a few things. First of all, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Mr. Nichols and our fiscal staff. I want to say thank you to the Governor's Finance Office, and in particular, I want to say thank you to the agency. I know that a lot of work went into this. I know that it is a very complex process. Nothing that we do will ever make it not complex. I know that there's some concern about how this is going to work. I agree. We're not going to get this completely figured out this time. But I do think that this helps us address be able to get across the finish line on addressing all of the findings from the legislative audit. Additionally, I think that including the ability to make sure that there is access to the contingency account in the event that we have a major fire, provides kind of that backstop to make sure that if the worst happens, that we make sure that we're able to pay our bills. I think that is something that's extremely important to us. At the same time, we want to try and limit the amount that we're kind of making trips to IFC, particularly runs on the contingency account, particularly given the uncertainty that we face over the upcoming biennium. And we want to get to a place where we have some increased stability. And so I think my ask is that we just continue to remain in communication. We want to be partners with you on making sure that we improve this process. I think this makes sure that there is some of the staffing resources to help address that, that we have some of the financial resources to help things, and we'll evaluate it as we go. And and I think we would just welcome if there are any ideas for how to improve this methodology moving forward. We are absolutely open to that. We know that this is not going to be the end of this process. We know we took some steps. We're kind of at this point seeing, okay, we need to make some additional adjustments. We know that probably we're going to need to make additional adjustments from here, and we are definitely open to that. So we just want to keep those lines of communication open so that we can figure out how to try and get things into the best possible position they can be, given that this is an area where there's lots of unpredictability and complexity by its nature. So, Ms. Casey, you want to come up and I see that you want to say something. So, even though we are on discussion, I want to give you the chance to say something.
Thank you. And again, for the record, Casey, I just wanted to put on the record that we did actually, the recommendation number 5, so we had implemented 9 of the 13 recommendations by implementing this system, the fire billing system. The only 3 that are out, or 4 that are outstanding, are the ones that are tied into this. Recommendation number 5 was the one that said we needed to separate in and out of state. The actual recommendation said that we just needed to be able to delineate the difference in the state accounting system. We did get that in place. It's in place today. It was stalled by not being able to pay any bills, so you couldn't see it. But there are function codes in the current accounting system right now where you could pull in and out of state differently than having the 2 separate budget accounts. And I did just want to state that. So we felt that did meet. We did meet a couple times on these recommendations with GFO and LCB. This was not what we had agreed to collectively, and I do just want to say that on the record as well. We had talked about this as an option, but there were so many complications to making this actually a reality, one of which is the 5-year average. We don't have a good 5-year average to go off of, as the account has always been commingled, so trying to figure that out for both an in-state and an out-of-state budget account would be complicated. And so we did have multiple meetings discussing this as we had opted for other options.
All right. Thank you for those remarks, Ms. Casey. Next time, please make sure you make those before we get into the motion portion, since you were up here previously. But we do appreciate that context. Do we have additional discussion? Senator Nguyen.
Thank you for that additional context. I know in the conversations that I've had regarding this audit and the recommendations out of the audit, as well as some of the conversations that I've had with the governor's office, I think we're all in alignment that there needs to be some transparency, especially when it comes to this, the distinction between some of these out-of-state and in-state fires. So I am supportive of this motion and the creation of this secondary account to kind of put those in there. I think first and foremost, I appreciate the speed that this agency has acted in light of a lot of those outstanding invoices, and I think we are on the right path. However, I think we need to be able to see this so we don't have to rely on an audit that we performed in order to find and discover a lot of this missing money. I think for most of us, it took until this legislative audit to realize that there was an outstanding $33 million that had not been recovered. And so I am supportive of this. I think I can agree with the chair that we are always open to those discussions, and I don't think you're ever going to satisfy everyone, but I think this brings transparency to the process so we can make those decisions and make sure that our firefighters that are going out fighting these disasters in other states or throughout our state, they are getting paid, but then we are also getting paid back for, lending them out. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Assemblymember Dickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was kind of agreeing with Senator Titus, and then when Ms. Casey came up, I know we need to do something, but I'm just not convinced this is it. So I'll be a no as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to again recognize all the work that the Division of Forestry has done to quickly address the audit findings and really applaud those efforts, as well as everything that you do. Given some of those remarks that were made, I will just say one thing. We are going to leave this motion on the table. We are going to take a vote on it. When we first had our hearing, I think our clear direction was for LCB Fiscal, Governor's Finance Office, and the agency to work together on a solution. So we are going to be making our recommendation. We are finishing up our budget closings within the full committee very soon. So if there are adjustments that could potentially be made, I just ask all three parties to get together, and have those conversations to see if there are any additional adjustments that can be made in advance of the final closing by the joint full committees. So, with that, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? I have nays from Assemblymember Hibbets, Senator Titus, Assemblymember Dickman. That motion does carry.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols, for the record. Moving on to the other closing items for the fire suppression account. These are listed on page 76. I would just briefly note, other closing item 1 relates to recommendations for Appropriations Act back language. Again, as previously mentioned, this budget is intended to have the ability to move general fund across both years of the biennium, in addition to request a general fund advance when approved by the director of the GFO. So other closing item 1 is requesting that back language be included again. Other closing item 2 relates to back language for the Authorizations Act. This relates to assessments collected for costs associated with the incident business unit and some equipment and vehicle related expenditures. Again, this is essentially carry forward of existing back language for the Authorizations Act. Fiscal staff would recommend that all other closing items be closed as recommended by the governor and request authority to make technical adjustments to this budget as needed.
Thank you. Members, any discussion, questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval of the recommendations as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols, for the record. Moving on now to the Conservation Camps budget account. This begins on page 79 of your packet. There are no major closing issues associated with this budget. However, there are some other closing items summarized on the table. Fiscal staff would recommend that those other closing items 1 through 6 be closed as recommended by the governor and request authority to make further technical adjustments to this budget account as needed.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move the recommendations as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries.
Thank you again. This is Colby Nichols for the record. That concludes the forestry budgets that were previously heard. There is one forestry budget that's been recommended for staff closure. However, consistent with the approach that we've taken through this session, we'll be going through all the staff closes at once. So if it's okay, I'd like to move on to the DEP administration account. That's the Division of Environmental Protection. That begins on page 81 of your closing packet. Again, there are no major closing issues associated with this account. There are 6 other closing items summarized in the table at the bottom of page 81, as well as some additional ones bulleted out on page 82. I would just note briefly other closing item again, 8. Again, this is related to the centralization of IT within DCNR. As those companion decision units have been approved in the DCNR administration budget account, we would recommend approval of these ones too. Also noting a technical adjustment to align as this position relates to transfers. Some of those transfer decision units are slightly out of alignment, so we're recommending a technical adjustment to line up those transfers so that they match. GFO concurs with that proposed adjustment. Fiscal staff would recommend that other closing items 1 through 7 and that other closing item 9 be closed as recommended by the governor, and that other closing item 8 be approved consistent with the subcommittee's recommended approval of those companion decision units in the DCNR administration budget account, and with that noted technical adjustment to align those costs in decision unit E912 with the funding adjustments in decision unit E512. And finally, fiscal staff would request authority to make further technical adjustments to this budget account as needed.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move approval of the recommendation as read by staff.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you again. That concludes the recommendations for the budgets that were previously heard. Moving forward, there are several budgets that have been recommended for staff closure. Consistent with the approach that we've taken in other closings, I would propose that I move pretty quickly through these budget accounts and then go to one batched motion at the end that addresses all the staff closing recommendations. The first staff closure account, this is the forestry nurseries account, begins on page 85 of your packet. There are no major closing issues. There is one other closing item, and again, the motion will be included as that large batch motion at the end. Moving on to the second, this is the Division of Environmental Protection's industrial site cleanup account. There are no major closing issues associated with this account, and there are two other closing items summarized in the table, as well as a third relating to the transfer of positions internally with DEP. Overall, this is budget neutral for the Division of Environmental Protection, so we would just note that as these positions are coming out of one budget account and going into the other, we would recommend that they be approved consistent with each other. The next budget account is the Division of Environmental Protection Air Quality budget account. That is on page 89 of your closing packet. There are no major closing issues associated with this account. There are 9 other closing items that are summarized at the top in the table at the bottom of page 89, as well as some additional separated out. Here, I would just note other closing item 13. This budget account is partially funded by the transfer of pollution control fees from the DMV's motor vehicle pollution control budget account. The amount recommended for this budget is approximately $2 million in each year of the biennium. However, in reviewing this and discussing this with the DMV analyst and the agency, it was identified that about $1 million of that transfer, so approximately half, would be contingent upon a $1 certificate fee that's being recommended by the governor for the DMV. So at the April 23rd, 2025 meeting of the Joint Subcommittee on Natural Resources, Public Safety, and Transportation, the subcommittee recommended approval of the pollution control fee increase. This is contingent upon passage of approval of Assembly Bill 545 or other enabling legislation. Moving on to the next budget, this is DEP's water pollution control. That begins on page 93 of your closing packet. Again, no major closing issues associated with this account. 4 other closing items that are summarized in the table at the bottom of page 93, and then a separate other closing item 5 that begins at the top of page 94. The next budget account would be DEP's materials management and corrective action. There are no major closing issues associated with this account. There are 9 other closing items as summarized in the table, as well as some additional ones listed below. Other closing item 12, again, this is the companion. We were talking about internal position transfers within DEP. This is the other side of that transfer in, transfer out. We would just recommend that both decision units be handled consistently. The next budget account is DEP's mining regulation and reclamation account. This is on page 99 of your packet. Again, no major closing issues. 2 other closing items are summarized in the table, as well as 2 that are some additional details provided below that. Moving on to the DEP State Revolving Fund Administrative Account. This begins on page 101 of your closing packet. Again, no major closing issues here. There are 5 other closing items as summarized in the table, as well as one additional one regarding that other closing item 6. This relates to 2 decision units. These are essentially extraneous decision units. They were intended to fund as this budget account transfers out funding to other parts of NDEP. These were intended to fund decision units that were ultimately not included in the governor's recommended budget. Discussing this with the GFO and the agency, we've identified that these 2 decision units in particular should not be approved, and that will be addressed in that batched motion at the end. The next budget account is water quality planning. That begins on page 103 of your closing packet. No major closing issues. Total of 10 other closing items that are summarized in the table there, as well as one additional one, number 11. Moving on to the Safe Drinking Water Program budget account. This begins on page 105 of your packet. No major closing issues again. There's one other closing item as summarized in the table, and then 2 other closing items that have some additional details. Just noting here, portion of these position costs are funded by interagency transfers. There's some discrepancies in the transfer in, transfer out, so if the subcommittee wishes to recommend approval, we would go in and make those technical adjustments to line up the transfer amounts. Moving on to the DEP State Environmental Commission budget account. This is on page 107 of your packet. There are no major closing issues or other closing items associated with this account. And finally, we move to DEP's Water Planning Capital Improvement Budget Account. This is on page 109 of your packet. Again, there are no major closing issues or other closing items, which leads us to the batch motion. But if you're all right, Chair, I would stop here for questions from the subcommittee.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Nichols. Members, any questions on any of these budgets before we proceed? All right, seeing none, please go ahead, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you again, Colby Nichols, for the record. As previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations for these following budget accounts, and to assist with the closing, fiscal staff has identified the budget accounts that are recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor. Fiscal staff would recommend that the following budget accounts be closed as recommended by the governor, with the technical adjustments noted, and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. Those include budget account 4235, that's Forestry's Nurseries budget; budget account 3175, this is DEP's Industrial Site Cleanup budget; budget account 3185, which is DEP's air quality. That's with the technical adjustment noted for other closing item 10. An alignment of federal revenues, and then other closing item 13, contingent upon passage and approval of Assembly Bill 545 or other legislation to increase the DMV's pollution control fee. Budget account 3186, DEP's water pollution control. Budget account 3187, DEP's materials management and corrective action. 3188, DEP mining regulation / reclamation. Budget account 3189, the DEP state revolving fund administrative account, with the exception of those two decision units, E302 and E711, which fund those transfers to the other budget accounts for decision units that were ultimately not included in the governor's recommended budget. Budget account 3193, this is DEP's water quality planning. Budget account 3197, the DEP's safe drinking water program, with those technical adjustments as noted in other closing items to align transfer amounts. Budget account 4149, DEP State Environmental Commission, as well as budget account 4155, DEP Water Planning Capital Improvement.
Okay, last chance. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move that we approve those recommendations as read by staff and give staff the authority to make any technical adjustments necessary.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a motion from Chair Taylor, a second from Assemblymember Brown May. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, I believe that completes our budget closings for the day. Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Thank you all for your time and attention today. Our last item on our agenda is public comment. If anyone would like to make public comment in Carson City or in Las Vegas, please come forward. Please remember to introduce yourself for the record. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Ian Hartshorn, IANHARTSHORN, Nevada Faculty Alliance. Thank you, Chair and members. As your committees work to close state budgets, we recognize, as we just saw this morning, that cuts and attempts at cost savings are going to rule the day. The Nevada Faculty Alliance encourages your consideration of the following issues. Along with our healthcare institutions, our public lands, our federal transportation infrastructure, also our colleges and universities are facing unprecedented cuts from the federal government. As it's UNR Day, I'll mention that President Sandoval identified that cuts just to the National Institutes of Health, one of several national programs being cut, would impact UNR to the tune of $4 million just in the first year. Impacts at UNLV were estimated to be even higher. State budgets like those you are closing are likely to compound these cuts. We also are concerned about public safety, which remains in the forefront of our minds, especially for faculty and staff who survived the mass shooting at UNLV's campus in 2023. Other acts of violence on college campuses around the country only reinforce our concerns. The governor's recommended budget already allocates less money to campus safety than NSHE says it needs. We hope legislators will protect this important public safety funding. Similarly, our campuses continue to hold positions open, restrict accounts, and limit our research and teaching mission due to unfunded components of the last legislative session. While historic cost of living increases were necessary to retain faculty and staff, disagreements on funding between the legislature and NSHE regents have led to frozen lines and difficulty delivering needed classes on multiple campuses. A proverb from East Africa says, when the elephants fight, the grass gets crushed. At the moment, the grass is our students and public sector employees. Fully funding existing costs, including past COLAs, is necessary to protect our students from fee increases and our staff from further cuts. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, and thanks to those of you wearing blue for UNR Day, but we also represent folks with other loyalties. Kent Irvin, ERVIN, Nevada Faculty Alliance. Thank you for working through these very hard decisions. The pre-forecast forecasts of the Economic Forum on Thursday suggest more cuts are coming. Federal funding of state programs is highly uncertain, to say the least, and the probability of a recession is increasing. According to the Technical Advisory Committee last week, tax credits approved by past legislatures will take bigger bites. These giveaways of revenue are having a major impact on the state budget, increasing from $92 million this biennium to over $164 next biennium. The proponents of tax credits like to tout economic benefits of giving back tax revenue. They use economic impact multipliers of 3.3 times or 12 times, or an even return on investment of 22 times. I wish I could invest money for a 2,200% return, but my father taught me about offers that seem too good to be true. So let's say you have to cut $100 million a year, and 60% of that is cuts to personnel by freezing positions or, again, balancing budgets on the backs of state employees. Jobs for Nevadans, providing necessary services for Nevadans. With a 3.3 times economic impact multiplier, that's a $300 million loss in economic activity. Cutting public service jobs will accelerate economic decline in Nevada, just making the problems worse. This sure seems like a rainy day. So we implore you to protect state employees and the positive economic impact they provide, along with serving our public. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else coming forward in Carson City, seeing no one in Las Vegas, AVH, would anyone like to provide public comment by phone?
Thank you, Chair. The public lines are open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
All right. Thank you all very much. That concludes our agenda for today. Go Rebels. We're adjourned.